I was traveling home on a Sunday night when I missed my usual train. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the station was almost completely empty. I had been working late and just wanted to get home. The next train was supposed to arrive at 11:42. When it finally pulled into the station, I noticed something strange. There were no advertisements on the outside, no route information, no digital display, just the train number. I assumed the display was broken. I got on. There were maybe 6 other passengers inside the entire carriage. Everyone was sitting quietly. Nobody was using their phone. Nobody was talking. I sat near the window. A few seconds later, the doors closed. The train started moving. I checked the route on my phone. Everything looked normal. The first station was only 4 minutes away. 4 minutes passed. The train didn't slow down. I waited another 5 minutes. Still nothing. I looked at the other passengers. Nobody seemed concerned. The train continued through the darkness. I walked toward the front of the carriage and asked one of the passengers, "Do you know if this train is going to Central?" The man looked at me. Then he said, "It doesn't stop there."
I thought I had misunderstood him. What do you mean? He looked away. It doesn't stop anywhere. I laughed nervously. That's impossible. He didn't answer. I went back to my seat. I checked my phone. There was no signal. Then I noticed the time. It was 12:08 a.m. I had been on the train for almost 30 minutes, but according to the route, I should have already passed my destination. I stood up again. This time, every passenger looked at me. The woman sitting across the aisle quietly said, "Don't ask the driver." I asked why. She shook her head. "Because he won't answer." I walked toward the front anyway. There was a glass door separating the passenger area from the driver's cabin. I could see the driver's seat. Someone was sitting there. I knocked on the glass. No reaction. I knocked again. The driver didn't move. Then the train entered a tunnel. The lights inside the carriage flickered. For a few seconds, everything went completely dark. When the lights came back on, one of the passengers was gone. I looked around. The seat near the door was empty. The man who had spoken to me was gone. I asked the woman where he went. She stared at the empty seat. Then she whispered, "He got off." I looked toward the doors. They hadn't opened. How? She didn't answer. The train continued through the tunnel. I returned to my seat. A few minutes later, the train finally slowed. I saw a station platform outside. There were no signs, no people, no lights except one flickering lamp. The train stopped. The doors opened. The woman across from me immediately stood up. She looked at me. "You need to get off." I asked why. She said, "Because this is the last station." I looked outside. Last station for what? She didn't answer. She stepped onto the platform. The doors closed behind her. The train started moving again. I was the only passenger left. I ran toward the driver's cabin. I pulled the door open. The driver's seat was empty. The train was moving by itself. I grabbed the emergency handle. Nothing happened. I pulled it again. Still nothing. Then the announcement system crackled. A woman's voice spoke. "Next stop." There was a long silence.
Then she said the name of my hometown. I froze. That was impossible. My hometown wasn't on this railway line. The train began slowing down. Outside the window, I saw familiar buildings, my street, the road near my house. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a train station directly beside my house. I'd lived there for 12 years. There had never been a station there. The train stopped. The doors opened. I stepped onto the platform. Everything was silent. There was nobody there. Then my phone suddenly regained signal. I received 12 missed calls, all from my own number.
A message appeared. Don't get back on. I turned around. The train was still there. The doors were open, and inside the carriage I could see the 6 passengers again. Every one of them was staring at me. Then I noticed something. They were all wearing the same clothes I'd seen when I first boarded, but now I understood why. They weren't passengers, they were photographs. The train doors closed. It disappeared into the darkness. I ran home. The next morning, I searched the train number online. I couldn't find it. I asked the railway office about it. They told me that train number had been discontinued 14 years earlier after an accident. I asked what kind of accident. The employee looked at me. Passenger train. How many people died? He checked the records. Then he said, 6 passengers and the driver. Then I thought about the carriage. 6 passengers, the empty driver's cabin, and the woman who told me to get off. I never found out why I was allowed to leave, but sometimes when I'm awake late at night, my phone receives a call from my own number. I never answer because the first time it happened, I heard a train announcement in the background. Next stop, your home.
I used to travel by train every weekend to visit my parents. The journey took about 2 hours, and I knew the route well. I knew which stations were busy, which carriages were usually crowded, and which parts of the train had almost no passengers. One Friday night, I boarded a train around 10 p.m. It was much quieter than usual. I walked through the carriages looking for an empty seat. Most of them were crowded. Eventually, I reached Carriage 7. It was completely empty. Not one passenger. I thought that was strange, but I was tired. I sat beside the window. A few minutes later, an older man entered. He walked slowly down the aisle and sat across from me. He didn't say anything. I nodded politely. He nodded back. Then he looked at the digital display above the door.
His expression changed. He whispered, "We're early." I looked at the clock. "What?" He didn't answer. The train began moving. For the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. Then the man suddenly asked, "Which station are you getting off at?" I told him. He stared at me. "You shouldn't." I laughed. "Why?" He looked toward the window. "Because it isn't there anymore." I thought he was confused. I ignored him. A few minutes later, the train slowed down. I recognized the station outside. It was my destination. I stood up. The older man grabbed my wrist.
Don't. I pulled my arm away. The doors opened.
I stepped onto the platform. Then I looked back. The man was standing inside the carriage. He was staring at me. He didn't move. The doors closed. The train left. I stood there for a moment. Then I realized something. The station was completely empty. Not just quiet, empty. The lights were off. The ticket machines were dark. There wasn't even a staff member. I checked the station sign. It had the correct name. I took out my phone. No signal. Then I heard a train approaching. I assumed it was another service, but when it arrived, I noticed something strange. It was the exact same train I had just left. Same number, same carriage arrangement, same scratches on the doors.
The doors opened. I didn't get on. I stepped backward. The train waited for several seconds. Then the doors closed. As it pulled away, I saw the older man through the window. He was still sitting in Carriage 7, but now there was someone sitting beside him. It was me. I watched myself sitting there, looking out the window, wearing the same clothes, holding the same phone. I couldn't move. The train disappeared. I spent the night walking around the station until morning. When the first staff member arrived, I told him what happened. He looked confused. I asked about Carriage 7. He said, "That carriage doesn't exist." I told him I had been inside it. He shook his head. "The train you're talking about doesn't have 7 carriages." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He pulled up the train schedule. The service I had taken had only 6 carriages. I asked him what train had arrived at the station. He stared at the screen. Then his expression changed. He told me to wait. A few minutes later, he returned with another employee. They asked me to describe the train. I did. They exchanged a look. Then one of them said, "There was an accident on this line years ago." I already knew about the accident. Everyone in the area did. A train had derailed during heavy rain. Several people died. But the employee told me something I didn't know. The train had 7 carriages. The 7th carriage was badly damaged. It was never returned to service. I asked what happened to it. He said they never recovered it. I didn't understand. How can you lose an entire train carriage? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked me something. "What time did you board?" I told him. He looked at his watch. Then he said, "That train doesn't run at that time anymore." I went home the next morning. I stopped traveling by train. For several months, nothing happened. Then, one evening, I received an email from the railway company. It was a customer satisfaction survey. I had never signed up for it. The email asked, "How was your journey in Carriage 7?"